Welcome, once again, to the Brownstone, Nero Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. Let's begin. Nero Wolfe and the clue at the Velvet Opera House. The trouble started, as it often does, with a favour. Not for Wolfe, he doesn't believe in favours. But a man who says no to a friend's sister is a man who doesn't much care for life's social grease. I had accepted the ticket with my usual aplomb and not a little curiosity. The Velvet Opera House wasn't my usual haunt. But when I'm told a debut soprano is lighting up the boards like sunrise on a bourbon bottle, I figure I can afford one evening of culture. Besides, the seats were first row, centre, and free. The Velvet was one of those architectural hangovers from a time when men wore spats and women carried fans to flirt behind. Red velvet drapes, brass rails polished to a jealous gleam, and murals overhead that looked like they'd been painted by cherubs with insomnia. The house was full. Manhattans, well shod and over-powdered, had gathered in force. I took my seat beside Marjorie Groves, the aforementioned sister, who gave me a sharp smile and a programme. She worked for the house in some public relations capacity. She smelled of lilacs and tension. "It's her last performance before she signs with Chicago," she whispered. The soprano, Clorinda Vale. "Leaving already?" I asked, thumbing the programme. "Didn't she just arrive?" 2 seasons. That's enough to get noticed if you're good, and she's very good. The orchestra tuned behind the pit rail, strings slicing softly into the hush. The lights dimmed, velvet on velvet. I leaned back and let the music find me. For the first act, Clorinda Vale proved every bit as talented as billed. She had presence, not just lungs, though those were admirable, but something in the way she held the stage. She didn't just sing, she told you she was singing, and you believed her. Marjorie leaned in between acts. She came from nowhere, little place in Vermont. Nobody had heard of her until 42. I nodded without speaking. The overture was starting again. The curtain rose. The second act played out with more flourish. Clorinda entered in a sweeping black gown, voice soaring like an argument you don't dare interrupt. She circled the male lead, eyes bright, hands clenched in the shape of devotion. Then she paused, caught herself. The audience thought it part of the choreography. I wasn't sure. Her next note came strained, then another, then none. She reached for a chair in the set, missed. Her arms jerked up once, like she was reaching through water, and then she dropped. Not like a performer, not in character, like a marionette with cut strings. A gasp moved through the house like a stiff breeze. The conductor froze baton mid-air. The orchestra faltered. One violin screeched, then silence. Someone shouted from the mezzanine. A man in a grey suit leapt from the aisle. "Doctor, I'm a doctor." He climbed to the stage in 3 awkward strides. Kneeling beside the soprano, he opened his bag. The curtains were still up, the lights still bright. A stagehand, uncertain, moved toward the rigging. Too late. The doctor stood and turned, face pale, expression locked. "She's dead," he said, just loud enough to carry. "Poison." Marjorie gasped beside me. A woman in the 3rd row screamed. The stagehand yanked the curtain, but the damage was done. The crowd stood as one. Confusion, hysteria. Applause like muscle memory rose and then died mid-clap. I rose too, scanning the orchestra pit. The conductor was gone. So were 2 of the violinists. A door backstage slammed. The doctor was arguing now with a man in a dark frock coat. The body still lay at centre stage, a spill of satin and frozen grace. Marjorie gripped my arm. "She wasn't sick, Archie. She wasn't. I know. What are you going to do?" I looked at her, at the crowd, already surging for the exits, at the blank velvet curtain, trembling slightly in its frame. "First," I said, "I'm going to make a phone call." Then I turned and walked up the aisle. Because the one man in New York who could untangle a murder from a stage play was likely 3 fingers deep into a bottle of beer, tucked under his yellow chair, and cursing the world's love of theatrics. But he'd listened. He always listened. If the murder had flair, and murder this was. The payphone across from the Velvet Opera House still had its coin box intact. I dropped a nickel and dialed home. It rang 4 times before Fritz picked up. "Brownstone residence," he said, his accent feathered but firm. "It's me," I said. "Is Wolfe up?" "He has not yet retired. He is," a pause, "engaged in evening beverage." That meant beer, possibly with pretzels. Good. He wouldn't be in his orchid room, and he hadn't climbed the stairs. Yet. "Tell him I'll be home in 20, I said, "and tell him to clear his calendar tomorrow. We have a corpse on a stage." Fritz sighed. "I shall inform him." The line went dead. I returned the receiver and walked toward the side alley. Backstage was already a circus. Uniforms had arrived, 2 patrolmen, fresh-faced and unsure what to do with divas. The doctor was giving a second version of his statement to someone with a notepad. The conductor had reappeared, flanked by the manager and an usher who looked one tremor from collapse. I flashed my license, the gold card from the state, and was allowed past the velvet rope. Stage left smelled of powder and varnish. Lights buzzed above, sweating heat over false walls and coiled cable. Clorinda Vale's body had been covered with a long cloth, but her hand stuck out, pale, still. I moved past her dressing room, where 2 makeup chairs sat empty, mirrors ringed with dark bulbs. 1 cup of coffee, 1 untouched sandwich, no sign of violence, too neat. A uniform approached. "You with the press?" "No," I said, showing the license again. "Wolfe's office." "The fat guy?" "That's the one." He gave a nod like it explained everything and let me pass. The stage manager was barking into a rotary phone on the wall, trying to delay the morning papers. In the hall behind the wings, I found Marjorie Groves. She was seated on a trunk, legs crossed, cigarette burning untouched in her hand. "You came back," she said. "I always come back." I took the cigarette and tapped it into a standing ashtray. "You okay?" She shook her head. "No one is. They're saying it was poison. That she just dropped." That's what I saw. She wasn't sick. She wasn't... She stopped, looked away. "There were rumours, Archie. She said someone was following her. Did she name names?" "No." "Did she tell you anything else?" She shook her head again. "I thought she was just being dramatic." "Wrong stage," I said. "She was being honest." I crouched to eye level. "Did anyone hate her?" Marjorie blinked. "She had rivals. Everyone does here. But no one would kill her. Not like this. She had something to hide. She had everything to lose." The stage creaked above us as someone paced. I stood, brushed my coat. "I need a list of everyone with access to her dressing room," I said. "Crew, cast, caterers. Anyone with a key. I don't..." "Marjorie," I looked at her. "Someone poisoned her. That wasn't an accident. This wasn't opera. This was murder." She nodded slowly, then stood, straightened her skirt and walked off toward the director's office. I took one last look at the curtain. It hung still now, heavy, final. Then I stepped into the alley, lit a cigarette, and watched a patrol car idle beside the back door. The soprano had sung her last, and somewhere behind that velvet, someone had just taken their final bow, unseen. It was time to raise the real curtain. The next morning began with eggs, toast, and indifference. Mine were scrambled. Wolfe's were untouched. He was reading the Gazette, his expression that of a man burdened by inferior minds. The article ran half a column on page 4. "Opera star dies on stage, foul play suspected." It got the spelling of her name right. That was about all. Wolfe lowered the paper half an inch. I sat opposite, coffee in hand. "You have nothing to say?" I asked. "I do," he replied. "Namely that the death of a soprano, however regrettable, is not my concern, Archie." He used my name like punctuation. Sharp, final, and without appeal. I leaned back. "She died in front of 1,200 people, collapsed mid-note." "Yes, I read that. The article was sensational. I decline the sensation. She was poisoned." "So the paper claims." He folded it with military precision. "If the police require my involvement, they will ask. They have not." "They will," I said. "But they're not the ones knocking." I stood. Before he could ask what I meant, the doorbell rang. Fritz did not move. He never does. So I crossed the hall and opened it myself. The man outside looked like he belonged in a better century. Black coat, deep purple scarf, gloved hands. Silver streaks at the temples, and eyes that had once known fire, but now knew velvet. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. "That's me. I am Camden Rule, artistic director of the Velvet Opera House." He stepped inside, uninvited but not impolite. His coat trailed faint perfume, bergamot and fear. "Mr. Wolfe will see me," he said. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," I replied. But I let him in anyway. Wolfe hadn't moved. He sat in his yellow chair, fingers tented beneath his chin. He disliked early guests. He disliked unannounced ones even more. "This is Camden Rule, from the Velvet." Wolfe looked at him once, then shifted in his chair. "Oprah," he said flatly. "Yes," Rule replied. "I presume you read the account?" "I did. I remain unmoved. She was murdered, so the press suggests." "I believe it," Rule said, "because I knew Clorinda, and I know why she was killed." Wolfe's left brow twitched, the closest he gets to surprise before beer. "I am not the police," he said, "and I am certainly not an admirer of vocal exhibition." Rule stepped forward. She wasn't killed for jealousy or for love. She was killed because she knew something. What did she know? Rule glanced at me, then back to Wolfe. I'd prefer discretion. Phooey. Wolfe waved a hand. You are not worth a lie. Either you speak freely or you leave. I have no proof, Rule said. But I believe someone in our company, someone close, is laundering money through the opera house. I blinked. That hadn't been in the Gazette. Clorinda, he went on, came to me 2 weeks ago. She said she'd found irregularities. A set of books. Not official. She asked what Red Pavilion meant. Wolfe frowned. Red Pavilion? She said the name appeared on internal memos, but I've never heard it before or since. 2 days later she began receiving unsigned notes, and now, I said, she's dead. Rule nodded, his mouth drawn tight. I cannot go to the police. If I do, the scandal will end us. But I need the truth. Wolfe sighed. If she was killed, and you are right, then someone thought her dangerous. Yes. Then we are all in danger now. Wolfe closed his eyes. The room fell quiet, save the ticking of the long case clock in the hall. Then he spoke. Mr. Rule, if your institution is entangled in criminal activity and your soprano murdered, the correct recourse is the police. They'll tear the place up quietly. Every drawer, every record. We won't survive the season. You mistake me for someone invested in your cultural preservation. I cleared my throat. Wolfe, if I may... You may not, he snapped. Then, more calmly, I am disinclined to get involved in amateur theatre politics masquerading as murder. Rule straightened. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. He did not plead. He reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded envelope. This, he said, is a copy of the ledger Clorinda mentioned. She left it with me the day before she died. Wolfe extended a hand. A document makes Wolfe red. Always. He opened it slowly, scanned the numbers, then stopped. His brow furrowed. These sums... Yes, Rule said. They're listed as donations, but there's no trace of them in our official accounts. Wolfe grunted. A second set of books. Yes. And you, he added dryly, did not notice? I oversee performances, not finances. Wolfe handed me the pages. I scanned them. Clean columns. Dates going back 3 years. Amounts large enough to make questions dangerous. Who handles your financials? I asked. Our board treasurer, Miss Alva Remington. But she's in Boston, visiting her sister. Convenient, Wolfe muttered. Rule clasped his gloves. I want to know who wrote these. I want to know who sent those notes. And I want to know who killed Clorinda Vale. Wolfe said nothing for a moment. Then he rose, an act as deliberate as sunrise. I dislike music, he said. I dislike velvet, but I dislike murder more. He looked at me. Archie, tomorrow you will visit the opera house. You will speak with this Miss Remington, when she returns, and you will inquire discreetly about the Red Pavilion. Rule stiffened. You'll take the case? I will consider it, Wolfe said, pending what Archie finds. Rule bowed, ever the man of the stage, then turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. I returned the ledger to Wolfe. You believe him? I asked. I believe, Wolfe said, that people rarely beg when they are lying. They threaten. Or they pay. He sat back down, tugging the shawl over his lap. Poison on a public stage, he mused. Barbaric, but precise. Too precise? I asked. Perhaps. The morning light slanted across the rug, gilding the red chairs like a slow curtain call. Wolfe reached for his beer. He drank once, grimaced and set it aside. Archie, he said, fetch the roster of the opera's patrons. And a list of last night's guests. You're in? I am cornered, he said sourly. That is not the same. Still, there was a gleam in his eye, like a man who had just remembered how the overture goes. And somewhere, behind velvet and music, someone was waiting for Act 2. The Velvet Opera House was quiet when I arrived. Too quiet for a place still echoing with applause, gasps, and a soprano's final breath. The scent of varnish, powder, and dust lingered like an old affair. I signed in at the side entrance, flashed my license again, and walked through the narrow backstage corridor. My first stop was the dressing room hallway. Clorinda Vale's door was shut and sealed. Another two bore fading gold letters, D. Loring and C. Aldridge. The second one opened as I approached. A young woman stepped out in slippers and a rehearsal robe. She froze when she saw me. Not the reaction of someone guilty, more like someone sick of questions. You're with the police? Private sector, I said, handing her the card. Archie Goodwin, Wolfe's office. She looked at the card, then back at me. I know the name. You work for that orchid-loving beast uptown. Guilty, I kept my smile flat. And you must be Miss Loring. Daphne. She opened the door wider. Come in, then. You'll want to ask about Clorinda. The room was a mess of silks, powders and half-drunk tea, a picture of a greyhound in a silver frame. No signs of mourning. Were you close? I asked. Daphne shrugged. As close as two sopranos can be when one gets the spotlight. You understudied her for 18 months. She never missed a show, not one. I warmed up. I never performed. That bother you? She looked me square. Would it bother you? Probably. She sat at the vanity, lit a cigarette. I didn't poison her, Mr. Goodwin. She was difficult, but not unworthy. Any fights recently? She accused me of reading her mail, said someone had taken a letter, insisted I had keys. What letter? I don't know. She never said. Just that it was important. And when was this? 3 days ago, I made a note. Where were you during the final act? In the wings. Waiting. Same as always. Who else was backstage? The conductor. 2 stagehands. Marjorie Groves, I think. And? Remington? Yes. She came back from Boston the night before, wanted to speak with Clorinda privately. They were in the lounge for 10 minutes. What about the drinks? Daphne raised an eyebrow. She always brought her own. A glass with her initials etched, gold trim. She'd drink nothing else. Did you see her pour it? No. But she kept the flask in her bag. She was careful, I stood. Anyone else upset with her? Daphne looked up. The conductor. He hated her tempo changes, said she ignored the score. And someone outside the company? She paused. Yes, a man named Thorne, Arthur Thorne, one of the patrons. Why him? He threatened to pull his donations last month. Said Clorinda embarrassed the company. Said her voice was too modern, too sharp. He liked the old style. And did she care? She laughed, loudly, told him to go fund mimes instead. I made another note, then tipped my hat. Thank you, Miss Loring. She nodded once, and this time her eyes were softer. Whoever did it, she said, they didn't just kill her voice. They killed what came next. The conductor's office was up a narrow staircase behind the orchestra pit. It smelled of pipe smoke, pencil lead, and old grudges. He was seated at a battered desk when I knocked. A thin man in a tight vest, sleeves rolled, hair oiled and motionless. Mr. Renzo, I asked. He looked up slowly. Yes? Archie Goodwin, Wolfe's office. I showed him the card. He didn't take it, just nodded and gestured to the chair opposite. I sat. Tell me about Clorinda Vale, I said. She was talented, he said, in the way hurricanes are powerful, untrained in subtlety, but formidable. You argued with her? Every week she overrode the tempo, insisted on interpretive liberties. You threatened to resign? Twice. But the board liked her, and I like paychecks. Where were you when she collapsed? He met my eyes. Standing 15 feet away, in the pit, conducting. See her drink anything? She took a sip from a gold-rimmed glass. Her usual. She never shared. Who brought her the glass? Her dresser, I believe. Or perhaps Marjorie Groves. She speak to anyone strange backstage? Only Remington that I saw. And Arthur Thorne, briefly. He showed up before the show. Not on the list. He say anything? They stepped aside. She returned with a pinched look, then sang her heart out and died. Did you hear of a red pavilion? His brow furrowed. No. Is that a set? Not yet. He stood abruptly. That will be all, Mr. Goodwin. I have rehearsal. I left him adjusting his cuffs, the baton already in his hand. Backstage again, I found Marjorie Groves leaning against a flats cart. I thought you'd left, she said. I don't leave without answers, I said. Or Wolfe's orders. She lit a cigarette. Her fingers trembled slightly. You saw her drink? Yes. Same glass she always used. Where was it before? In her bag. She kept it wrapped in a silk scarf. Who touched it? Only her. Or me, once, when she asked me to rinse it. When was that? The night before. She said it tasted off. Like metal. Metal. Marjorie nodded. She said the same thing about the water in her kettle. Who had access to her bag? Marjorie exhaled. Almost no one. It stayed locked in her armoire. She kept the key. But 2 weeks ago she said someone had moved it, slightly, enough for her to notice. She tell anyone? She told me, and she said if anything happened, I should speak to someone who listens. Wolfe? She didn't name names, but I figured it out. I looked at her. She knew she was in danger. Yes. I reached the alleyway 10 minutes later. It was drizzling now, fine, sharp rain that stung without soaking. I lit a cigarette, leaned on the brick and pulled out my notebook. One dead soprano, One nervous director, a jealous understudy, a rigid conductor, and a patron with deep pockets and shallow taste. Everyone swore she drank from one glass. Everyone agreed no one else touched it, which meant either someone was lying, or they found a way to kill her without ever laying a hand. Kramer stormed in like a thundercloud with a badge. Fritz had the foresight to lock the front door after I left, but when I returned that afternoon, he was already parked at the curb. His cigar glowed like a fuse in the grey November light. "I don't like being late to my own case," he said, "especially when I find you're already sniffing around backstage like a goddamn bloodhound." I offered him a polite smile. "You've been informed then? The coroner called me direct. The tox report came in this morning. You want to know what killed her?" I stepped aside as he marched up the brownstone steps. "Let me guess," I said. "Not heartbreak." He turned as we entered the hall. "Exotic neurotoxin. South American. Hard to pronounce. Harder to trace. Not something you find in a midtown drugstore." Fritz appeared, folded hands, unreadable. "Good afternoon, Inspector." Kramer grunted. "Is he office?" Fritz said. "He is seated. I'm sure he is." Wolfe looked up as we entered. His expression didn't change. He remained in the yellow chair, fingertips steepled, a book closed on the armrest. "Good afternoon, Inspector. Don't give me the polite routine, Wolfe. This is your circus now too. Only if I choose to attend." "Then attend this." Kramer tossed a folded sheet onto Wolfe's desk. "Tox results. Clorinda Vale was dosed with a compound used by tribes in the Andes to paralyze game. Low dose. She suffocated mid-area. No antidote." Wolfe read the sheet slowly. His mouth tightened. "An impressive choice. Very clean." "Too clean," I added. "I was backstage again this morning." "And?" Wolfe asked. I dropped the evidence on the table. A glass flask of amber brandy, sealed. The label read, Saint Antoine, Reserve, 1931. Found it in her dressing room cabinet, tucked behind a curtain shawl. Kramer leaned in. "You touched it?" "I wore gloves. No prints on the stopper. It hasn't been opened since last week. The lab will love that." "It's not the bottle she drank from," I said. "But she filled her glass from it. At least, that's what she told people." "Then the brandy's the thing," Kramer said, "and whoever planted it knew she'd never share." Wolfe rose, slowly, and approached the desk. He didn't touch the bottle, just examined it. "No fingerprints," he murmured. "No tampering with the seal." He looked at me. "You believe it was swapped?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but it feels staged." Kramer circled the desk. "This is what gets me. The poison's rare, precise, but the delivery's sloppy. You don't leave the murder weapon behind like a wrapped gift. Unless," Wolfe said, "you want it found." That silenced us both. Kramer exhaled smoke. "So we're looking at someone who wants credit. Or a diversion. Or," Wolfe added, "a performance." He sat again. Not lazily, thoughtfully. "There is such a thing," he said, "as an elegant frame. This, Inspector, may be one." I leaned back in the red chair. "You think it's too easy?" "I think it's been arranged to seem easy. And that's much worse." Kramer grunted, then turned. "I'll take the bottle to the lab. But don't wait on me, Wolfe. Someone staged this. Find out who wrote the script." After Kramer left with the bottle under his arm and thunder in his step, Wolfe remained still. The room was quiet. Even the radiator seemed hesitant. I stood at the office window, watching a cab idle at the corner. The sky hung low and pewter-coloured. Everything felt muffled. "I don't like it," I said. "Too clean, too neat. The flask's sealed, the timing's perfect, and no one saw a thing." "No one admits to seeing," Wolfe replied. "There's a difference." He tapped the desk twice. A signal for thought. Or beer. I fetched one from the kitchen and returned. He opened it with slow fingers. "The compound," he said, "derived from curare, refined into a tasteless form, used in minute amounts. Quite precise. Could someone like Rule get it?" "Unlikely, but money and fear are capable buyers." I flipped through my notes. Daphne Loring claimed Clorinda accused her of taking a letter. Said someone had moved her bag. Marjorie rinsed her glass once, said it tasted metallic. And the brandy? Also sealed. Same cabinet, same day. Wolfe nodded, then closed his eyes. "Archie," he said, "this is not an impulsive crime. This is arrangement, structure, design." I knew that tone, the one he used when a theory was cracking through like a seed beneath concrete. "Someone wanted her gone," I said, "but also wanted the case to point in a particular direction." "Yes. And they left the bottle like a calling card?" "No. A magician misdirects with his left hand while the right does the trick." So what's the trick? That, Wolfe said, is what you're going to find out. He lifted the envelope Rule had left earlier. Inside was a folded sheet with 4 names, all patrons of the Velvet Opera House, all contributors to something called the Red Pavilion Fund. All of them donated, Wolfe said. None of them admitted it. What is the pavilion? Wolfe scowled. We don't know if it exists. The name appears on ledgers but nowhere else. I sat again. Clorinda found out something linked to that fund. And someone ensured she'd never talk. We sat in the stillness. Wolfe reached for his beer again, drank and sighed. I dislike actors, he said. Professionals in deceit. They perform sincerity while cloaking intent. I stood. Then it's lucky I'm not on the stage. Where to next? The Velvet. Speak to the staff again. Find the one who insists they saw nothing, but knows too much. And the dressing room. Let them reopen it, under supervision. Observe what's missing, not what remains. I pulled on my coat. Wolfe raised a hand. One more thing, he said. Trust no timetable. The murder did not begin at Curtain. It began when the flask was sealed. I left with the city's dusk falling behind me. Cold wind caught my collar. And as I walked, one thought clung like lint. The soprano's final aria hadn't ended in applause. It ended in silence, carefully placed, neatly timed and deadly. Someone had written that silence, and now it was my job to find the composer. It started with a thread, or rather, the lack of one. Fritz found it while examining a costume delivered in a tissue-lined box from the Velvet Opera House. It had arrived early, couriered by a junior assistant too frightened to stay and answer questions. Clorinda Vale's final costume, black velvet, hand-stitched and reportedly torn near the hem during her last act. Wolfe had requested it the previous evening. He was convinced the wardrobe, like the flask, had been tampered with. I didn't argue, not because I believed it, but because I'd seen him solve more with less. I was finishing breakfast, eggs, soft, when Fritz entered the dining room without a word. He held the costume gingerly, like it might dissolve. In his other hand, he carried a small, folded note, looked up from his coffee and frowned. I found it stitched into the hem, Fritz said. It had been sewn shut with fresh thread, not part of the original work. Wolfe set down his cup. Show me. Fritz unfolded the note. The paper was brittle, creased and yellowing at the edges. But the ink was still sharp, the strokes deliberate. There were only 12 words. Tell Magdalena she was right about the Red Pavilion, CV. Wolfe stared at it for a moment, then stood and walked to the window. The drapes were half drawn. Light poured in gently, dust spiralling through the sunbeam like smoke. He didn't speak, which meant I did. Magdalena? I asked. Any relation to the mystery soprano in hiding? Possibly, Wolfe murmured. Possibly not. Possibly not. I can check the cast archives. Do that. And take the note with you. Who's Magdalena? I asked again. Wolfe turned, eyes narrowed. Whoever she is, he said. She knew something Clorinda confirmed. That makes her vital. Perhaps next. It was enough for me. By 11:30, I was stepping through the backstage doors of the Velvet again. Rain had started, fine and cold, and the lobby had a wet wool smell. A new poster had been mounted in the vestibule, a tribute to Clorinda Vale, Friday 8 p.m. Too soon. Too eager. A familiar voice called out as I passed the costume workshop. It was Marjorie Groves, hair pinned, eyes rimmed with worry. She motioned me inside. I heard you requested her dress, she said. The black one? It arrived this morning? Why that one? Because it spoke. I pulled the note from my pocket and handed it over. Her eyes widened. She didn't blink for a full 5 seconds. Magdalena, she said softly. She's real? You know her? I know of her. Clorinda mentioned her twice, whispered it, like a name she didn't want to say too loud. I thought it was a character or a code. It might be both. Marjorie paced slowly, reading the note again. The Red Pavilion. She said that phrase too, 2 weeks ago. Said it was a ghost. A ghost. Her word, not mine. Said the pavilion didn't exist, but someone was hiding behind it. I scribbled the quote in my notebook, then turned toward the wardrobe archive. Rows of labelled drawers and tall oak cabinets stretched down a dim corridor. A man in a tweed vest and fingerless gloves stood hunched over a form. When I asked for the cast records from 1935 to 1940, he winced. That'll take hours. I have time, I smiled, flat. Do you? 10 minutes later, he brought out a dusty ledger. I flipped through, scanning names and roles, then stopped. Magdalena Tierce, soprano, Velvet Opera Company, 1937-39. Last performance, Lucia G. Lammermoor. Status, deceased, presumed lost in Europe, 1942. I turned to the man. Who wrote that? The director back then. Rule wasn't in charge yet. Was she well known? No. Voice like glass, but she vanished. Did she have family in the company? He hesitated. I think she had a sister, but that was rumour. Different surnames. What was her final show? Spring of 39. She left after. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. I took the ledger, jotted the page number, and returned it. Then I headed back to Marjorie. She had a sister? Yes. Marjorie looked up. That's what Clorinda said once, that her sister died in a war she didn't fight. And if that sister never died, Marjorie paled, then someone's been lying. By the time I reached the brownstone again, the rain had moved east. The pavement gleamed. A fog had crept up from the Hudson, softening the edges of the world. Wolfe was still in the office. Fritz had returned the costume to its box, now resting beside the globe. Wolfe looked up when I entered. Well, he said. Magdalena Tierce, soprano, performed here from 37 to 39. Last seen spring of that year. Reported dead in Europe, 1942. Reported by whom? The company director at the time, not Rule. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And she was rumoured to have a sister? Clorinda, he exhaled through his nose. That would make sense. If Clorinda knew her sister wasn't dead, and that the pavilion was part of something Magdalena exposed, then she was living on borrowed time. She was investigating the same thing her sister had, years later, and died for it. He tapped the corner of the note again. The message isn't confession, it's confirmation. She was passing the truth forward to someone who already suspected. Someone named Magdalena, or someone using her name. I sat. The red chair creaked faintly. Do you think she's alive? Wolfe didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the bookshelf behind him, pulled down a thick blue volume, City Planning Records, 1940. While you were gone, he said, I had Saul make inquiries. Saul Panzer was Wolfe's human bloodhound. When Saul sniffed, people answered. Wolfe opened the book and pointed. Red Pavilion, filed as a planned addition to the Opera House. Construction approved. Funding granted in 1936, except it was never built. No. He turned the page. Instead, records vanish. No blueprints. Just gaps. A phantom wing, I said. On paper only. Yet donations continued, and Clorinda found them. She had the ledger. She also had someone watching her. Wolfe nodded. Perhaps someone she trusted. I thought of the sealed flask. The perfect setup, and the perfect misdirection. Wolfe set the volume aside and steepled his fingers. Archie, tomorrow you will return to the Opera House. You will speak with Alva Remington, and you will ask for the pavilion files, the ones that don't exist. She won't give them. Then find out who kept them. Someone has them. And Magdalena? Ask Marjorie. She knows more than she's saying. I stood, then paused. There's something else. Wolfe looked up. The note wasn't addressed to Wolfe. It wasn't left in the flat. It was stitched into a costume. That means it wasn't meant for us. No, Wolfe said quietly. It was meant for someone still there. I left early the next morning. The fog had thickened. Taxi horns honked like lost sheep. When I reached the Opera House, the lobby was empty but for a janitor humming Carmen in falsetto. I found Alva Remington in a rehearsal room, sorting grant letters into neat piles. She was older than I remembered, or maybe just tired. Miss Remington, I said, do you know what the Red Pavilion was meant to be? She stopped sorting, her lips pressed together. Then, a fiction. Clorinda thought it was real. She was wrong, but money was taken for it. That happens in the arts. Clorinda died for it. Her hands trembled. Then she sat. I told them not to dig it up again. But Magdalena started it, and Clorinda couldn't let it go. Where is Magdalena now? I don't know. You said she died. That was what we were told. I watched her, waited. She came back once, she whispered, in 1944. She looked different, older, changed. She warned me. Warned you of what? That people were laundering money through the company, that the pavilion was never meant to be built. And who was behind it? She shook her head. I never asked. I rose, left her in the shadows of the rehearsal room, then found Marjorie Groves standing alone beneath the upper gallery. I need to ask you plainly, I said. Are you Magdalena? She looked at me a long time, then smiled. No, she said. But I know where she is. Her name was Eleanor Harrowby, widow of Franklin Harrowby, textile magnate, society fox, and one of the earliest financial backers of the Velvet Opera House. I called ahead. She didn't answer, so I called again. On the third ring, a voice with starch in every syllable informed me she would receive me at 4 sharp. Her townhouse faced the park, the kind of brick facade you only get from 3 generations of lawyers and 1 strategic marriage. The butler let me in, stiff as plaster, and directed me to a parlour draped in embroidered linens and polished silver. A grandfather clock ticked precisely. No warmth, no clutter, just elegance preserved like a museum. Mrs. Harrowby entered with slow confidence. She was tall, silver-haired, not frail but practised. A face that had posed for portraits and rejected cameras ever since. "You're from the papers?" "No, ma'am. Wolfe's office." I handed her the card. She didn't look at it, just placed it on a side table, unopened. "I assumed you'd be older." "I'm not." She sat across from me. The cushions barely made a sound. "You've come about Clorinda Vale," she said. "Yes. She was a splendid performer. I never cared for her personally, but one doesn't fund the arts for company." "Your name appeared in several ledgers," I said, "marked under a heading called the Red Pavilion Fund." A silence followed. It wasn't shock. It was the silence of someone checking whether the war had finally arrived at the gate. "My husband handled the financials," she said. "I signed the checks. He made the arrangements." "Were you aware the pavilion was never built?" She gave a soft smile. "I'm aware it became inconvenient. Disappeared from the books in 1938. That's when Franklin died. How convenient for everyone." Her eyes flicked up. Cold. Steel behind the crystal. "Mr. Goodwin, if you came here to accuse a dead man, I suggest you dig elsewhere." "I'm not accusing. I'm asking whether Clorinda Vale ever contacted you about the fund." She tapped a gloved finger on the armrest. "She wrote. Once. She was vague. Said she had questions about a performance in 1939, one that was cancelled. She never mentioned the pavilion. But she mentioned Magdalena." Mrs. Harrowby hesitated. "Just for a beat." "Yes. And you knew the name. I knew the voice." She stood and walked slowly to a framed photo near the fireplace. In it, a woman in costume, frozen mid-bow. "You're not the first to ask," she said. "She was extraordinary, but unstable. She vanished. She fled," she corrected, "during the war. To Spain, I think. The company buried her memory. Did your husband know her? Franklin funded her debut." She turned back toward me. He was not a careful man. I stood and approached the photograph. The image had faded at the edges, but the eyes were unmistakable. Alive, alert, watching, even now. "Did she ever return?" I asked. "If she did," said Mrs. Harrowby, "she had the sense not to knock on my door." She poured herself a glass of something amber, didn't offer me one. "Mr. Goodwin," she continued, "the opera world is full of ghost stories, composers who vanish, librettos lost in flames. A soprano lost in Europe doesn't surprise anyone, especially if she knew too much." I took out my notebook. Clorinda found something in the old records. She mentioned the pavilion. She tried to reach out. She should have been more careful. That sounds like a warning. It's a truth. Truths aren't always polite. I flipped a page. "Your late husband's name appears on 5 entries tied to missing funds. Donations sent under the pavilion project, then gone. He had enemies," she said quietly, "men who moved behind ledgers. I warned him. But Franklin thought patronage bought protection. And did it?" She finished the glass. "No, it bought silence. And one night, it stopped buying even that." "You think his death wasn't natural?" She looked at me. "I think men who swim with sharks shouldn't bleed." Outside, a bell struck 5. Inside, the parlour dimmed slightly with the dusk. I moved toward the door, slowly. She followed with equal measure. "One last thing," I said. "If Magdalena Tiesa came back, if she's alive, would she come here?" "She would not," Mrs. Harrowby said, "and she wouldn't survive it if she did." I reached for the handle. "Tell Wolfe," she added, "that I liked him better when he stayed out of velvet business." I nodded, stepped into the hall. The butler was already waiting to close the door. As I descended the stone steps and stepped into the thinning light, one thing was clear. Clorinda hadn't uncovered a theft. She'd disturbed a system. And now, somewhere behind velvet curtains and dead husbands, a ghost was watching the final act unfold. The second time Daphne Loring came to the brownstone, she wore gloves and regret. The gloves were grey kid leather. The regret came later. I'd called her that morning after Wolfe asked me what had changed, not on the stage, but off it. My guess was Daphne. She answered the phone with too much eagerness and too little surprise. Wolfe received her at 3 o'clock. The orchids had been seen to. The room smelled faintly of dusted paper and damp wool. She entered with that self-conscious elegance some actresses adopt when playing the role of themselves. Wolfe didn't rise. He rarely did, but he looked at her fully, not as a woman. "Miss Loring," he said. Your voice suggested something pressing. "It is," she said, then turned to me. "I didn't mean to lie, Mr. Goodwin. I just didn't think it mattered. Most lies begin that way." She sat in the red chair, clasped her gloved hands tightly. "I forged her signature," she said. Wolfe raised one brow. I sat forward. "What for?" I asked. "A rehearsal change, 2 days before her death. Clorinda was scheduled to sing the finale in a new key. She refused. I was told to get her approval." "Told by whom?" Wolfe asked. Her pause was long. Then, "Mr. Thorne." "The patron?" "Arthur Thorne?" "Yes." "What was his authority?" "Financial," she said. "He said her refusal jeopardized his donation." Wolfe's fingers twitched once, then stilled. "So you forged the request?" "Yes, and submitted it to the conductor's assistant. She accepted it." "Did Clorinda know?" I asked. "She found out the morning of the show. She confronted me in the hallway. She was furious." "Did you admit it?" "I denied it. Then an hour later, I confessed." "To her?" "Yes." "What did she do?" "Calm. Too calm. She said, 'It figures,' then walked away." Wolfe leaned back. "You believed she was being replaced?" "Yes," Daphne said softly. "I thought they were grooming someone else. Someone closer to the money." "And you thought," Wolfe said, "that if she fell out of favour, I might get my chance?" "Yes." She looked down at her gloves, then pulled them off slowly, fingers tight. "I didn't hurt her, Mr. Wolfe. I was desperate, not cruel." Wolfe's voice was almost gentle. "Miss Loring, this is not about jealousy." She looked up. "This is about theft," he said. "And silence bought with poison." Daphne stared at Wolfe, not offended, not afraid, just stripped bare by the word. "Theft?" she asked. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Not of art. Of money. The Red Pavilion never existed. But donations to it did." Her eyes widened. "I didn't know." "You knew enough to forge a document," Wolfe said. "You feared replacement, not because you lacked talent, but because someone had promised that replacement already. I never meant... Intentions don't kill. Poison does." She gripped the arms of the chair. The upholstery gave slightly under her weight. "I thought if I got one performance, just one, they'd see what I could do." "And who would be watching?" Wolfe asked. Her lips trembled. "Thorne. He said the board needed new blood. He hinted Clorinda's time was done. You interpreted that as an opportunity." "Yes, and you acted accordingly." "I didn't think it would go this far." Wolfe gestured. "Archie." I rose and stepped into the kitchen, returned with a folder. Inside were the original rehearsal sheets. 2 were signed in black ink, 1 in blue, Clorinda's name, but not her hand. Wolfe slid it across the desk. "You see," he said, "we don't care about jealousy or dreams deferred. We care about what happened between ink and death." Daphne stared at the paper, then nodded once. "I didn't poison her," she said, "but I helped push her forward. I just didn't know the drop was waiting." Wolfe leaned back. "Did you ever see Thorne with Clorinda outside the opera?" "No." "Did he ever speak of Magdalena?" Her head tilted. "Once. He said, 'The ghost sings again.' I didn't know what it meant. It means she wasn't dead. And he knew it." I closed the folder. Daphne's hands were shaking now, faintly. "You'll stay available," Wolfe said. "Yes. You will not leave town. You will not destroy correspondence." She nodded again. "Am I being arrested?" "Not yet," I said. She rose slowly, her gloves tucked under one arm, the kind of exit that feels like a curtain closing. When she was gone, Wolfe exhaled through his nose. "The motive shifts," he said. "From rivalry to fraud," I replied. "No," he said, "from fear to exposure." He looked toward the window. Outside, Manhattan moved on. Inside, the velvet hung heavier. And somewhere, behind an area and a signature, someone had pulled the strings. The phone rang at 5 minutes to 9. I was halfway through a ham sandwich and the tail end of a day I wouldn't mourn. Wolfe had already retired upstairs for his evening ritual of beer, silence, and paperback history. I answered on the 3rd ring. Goodwin. A familiar voice, low, clipped with gravel beneath the polish. "All Panzer." "She's alive," he said. I set the sandwich down. "Magdalena? She goes by Yvette now. Yvette Le Marchand. She's living under a false French passport. Has been for at least 6 years." "Where?" "Greenwich Village, Waverley and Bank, above a record shop. Name's on the buzzer. Confirmed? I saw her. Twice. Once entering the building, once leaving it. The face is older, but the eyes, same." I hung up, climbed the stairs, and knocked on Wolfe's door. He answered wearing a robe that looked older than the decade and a look that dared interruption. "She's alive," I said. "Magdalena Tiercy, alias Yvette Le Marchand, living in the village." Wolfe stared at me, his brow barely moved. Then, "When did she arrive?" "Unknown. But Saul says she's been in the city for years." "And no one noticed? She changed more than her name." "Have you spoken to her?" "No, just Saul." Wolfe stepped back into the room. He crossed to the bookshelf, pulled down a volume, opera programs, bound in leather. He flipped through until he found it. 1938, Velvet Opera House. Cast list. Lucia di Lammermoor, Tiercy as lead. "She was the talent," he murmured. "Clorinda was the Polish. One vanished, one rose, and now one's dead." "Bring her in," Wolfe said. "Tomorrow morning, 9 sharp." The next day I stood outside the record shop at 8:30. A bell over the door gave a tired chime when I stepped inside. Jazz crooned from a console radio near the back. A clerk with more hair than sense offered a nod. "Looking for vinyl or shellac?" "Neither," I said. "Yvette Le Marchand live upstairs?" "She does." "Can you ring her?" He blinked. "Is she expecting you?" "More than she knows." He tapped a button. A minute passed, and her voice filtered through the intercom. "Oui?" I pressed the mic. "Miss Le Marchand, my name is Archie Goodwin. I'd like 10 minutes of your time." Silence. Then, 3rd floor, no elevator. I climbed the stairs and knocked once. She opened the door slowly. No chain, no hesitation. She wore a navy housecoat, pressed and proper. Her hair was silver at the temples, swept back. Eyes, sharp, cool, the colour of rain on slate. "You knew Clorinda," I said. She studied me. "I was told no one remembered." "We do." She stepped aside. The apartment was small, spare, but clean. Books on the shelf. No photographs. Curtains drawn against the morning. I sat. She remained standing. "You're not the police." "No. But you ask questions. I work for someone who asked better ones." Her voice tightened. "Wolfe." "Yes." She turned toward the window. "I heard about Clorinda. The papers buried the truth." "You knew her?" "I knew of her." She turned. "We shared blood, not birthdays. Same father. Different sins." "She ever know?" "Yes. Not until later. Too late." "Why stay hidden?" She crossed to the shelf, took down a book, thumbed a page without reading. "I died for good reason. And lived for better ones. Clorinda found something. Something that pointed to the pavilion. She was asking questions." "She always had the wrong timing," Magdalena said. "Same as me." I leaned forward. "Did you warn her?" "I tried." "When?" 3 weeks ago. She wouldn't see me. I left a note. I think she read it." "She did. She left one for you." Sewn into her costume. Magdalena's face changed, just slightly, as if memory touched a nerve that never healed. "Half this company's been laundering money through a ghost wing and drinking champagne while bodies hit the stage. You think it's that direct?" "I think someone wanted a soprano dead, and made damn sure they'd look like a patron instead of a killer." "Then you won't mind if we keep poking?" "You can poke until the violins rot. Just keep Wolfe off my back. He's not on it. He's 10 steps behind it, asking what it's made of." "Good. Then he can read the subpoenas with everyone else." He turned, lit a cigar and walked away into the swirl of officers shouting over clipboard forms. The opera house, for the first time in 20 years, went quiet. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe didn't look up as I entered. I laid the folded floor plan on the desk beside the typewritten denial. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the pencil scrawl, and grunted. They filed to deny the pavilion's existence before the foundation was even laid, which means they planned to fake it from the start. "More likely," he said, "they planned to fund it in print and bury it in stone." He turned to the costume logs. Fritz had organised them chronologically, every garment sewn, fitted, altered, retired. And next to it, a new list. Names of everyone was archived the week Clorinda died. 5 names. 1 unfamiliar. Thomas Arledge, retired tenor, no role listed. No forwarding address, just a note. Final performance 1939. I glanced at Wolfe. He nodded once. Find him. I found him above a tailor's shop in Little Italy. Nameplate T. Arledge, 3R. The buzzer didn't work, so I climbed. Stairs creaked like stage boards. The air smelled of wool and old tobacco. The door was unlocked. I knocked once and stepped inside. He was seated in a chair near the window, thin, high-cheeked, pale as stage powder, eyes like old marble. He didn't startle. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You know who I am?" He didn't answer, just stared at the street below. "I came about Clorinda Vale." Still nothing. "And Magdalena." His fingers twitched. "Not much. Enough." You knew them both? They knew the music, he said, better than anyone. But one lived, one didn't. She sang, he said, like someone being chased by her own echo. Clorinda or Magdalena? Both. I stepped further into the room. Stacks of boxes lined the far wall, programs, costumes, a trunk with brass fittings. You kept your notes? I asked. No one asked for them back. Mind if I look? His silence meant maybe. I knelt by the trunk, flipped the latch and opened it. Inside, old playbills, sheet music with annotations, letters folded and bound in twine, and then a folder marked 1938 personal. The folder was slim, but inside it breathed like something buried. 4 letters, all handwritten, one signed M, one signed C, and 2 unsigned but unmistakably written by the same hand. Looping, elegant, fearful. I glanced at Archie. He hadn't moved. You kept these, I said. Why? They asked me to burn them. I forgot. You remember what they meant? I remember what they tried to forget. The first letter was dated June 1938. It mentioned construction delays, a dispute over where to place the new wing, someone named R, and a line that stuck. They've buried the ledger with the plans, in both cases unfinished. The second was an apology, short, almost cryptic. Clorinda writing to someone she never called by name. I wasn't supposed to know, but I read it anyway, and I see now why you left. The third was a reply, Magdalena's hand, unmistakable. You were never the target, dearest, but you stood too close to the secret, and now you are lit by the same flame. The fourth letter was blank inside, save one line. If you cannot sing it, hide it. I returned the letters to the folder, closed the trunk, and rose. Do you know who killed her? I asked. Archie blinked slowly. The same people who built a room that never existed. The conversation was over. I left the building, stepped out into air that smelled faintly of roasting chestnuts and wet pavement, called the cab, gave the address, and leaned back with the folder in my lap. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe waited. He hadn't moved. I sometimes suspected he didn't breathe unless Fritz reminded him. I laid the letters on the desk. He read them in silence, one by one, lips thin, eyes glassy with thought. When he finished, he looked up. Magdalena gave her the truth, and Clorinda tried to survive it. She tried to hand it back. Too late. He set the letters aside, then turned to the floor plans again. The pavilion, he said, never broke ground. But the lie did, and it grew roots. Roots deep enough to kill for. He stood, slowly, stiffly, and walked to the cabinet beside the globe. He opened a drawer and removed a file labelled Operatic Closed. You're reopening that? I asked. No, he said. I'm rewriting it. He turned. There is a pattern. Clorinda stepped on something real. Daphne forged the first breach. And someone in the shadows, someone with money and memory, is tying up the ends. And what's left? Wolfe looked toward the window. Outside, the city glowed beneath the mist like a lantern behind gauze. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just said, only the final note. The rain had let up just enough to make the windows look like smoked glass. Wolfe sat silent, eyes on the corner of the room, not the orchids, not me. I was in the red chair, my right shoe tapping the carpet in something like Morse code. Fritz brought in the tray, cheese curls, warm sausage, a tiny bowl of mustard, and vanished before I could test his mood. I set the tray on the corner table. Wolfe didn't glance at it. Archie. His voice came low, tight. I reached for my notebook. Do not write, just listen. I dropped the pen. That always gets his attention. 3 days ago, he said, you reported that Magdalena had used the name Mrs. E. Kessler at the Opera House East Gate, yes? Yes. She signed the lighting registry. She did not. He closed his eyes. That is the forged name. The signature's real, but the name belongs to no one. I waited. He lifted a sheet from the arm of his chair, crisp ivory paper, and read aloud. Opera House Ledger 98 to 1941. Fund disbursement for structural expansion. Red Pavilion, Stage East Wing. I knew that wing. I'd walked it. Nothing about it suggested a new build. Certainly not one meant for the public. Just locked doors, utility crates, a few velvet cases that smelled of mildew and moths. I don't get it, he sighed. The Red Pavilion was never built. The money, Archie. $500,000 in donations. Gone. I whistled through my teeth. No blueprints were filed. No permits pulled. Magdalena's name appears on the donor acknowledgement forms as the consulting artist in exile. She was in Spain, possibly Geneva, but the name is there. That means she either signed off, I said, or someone pretended she did. He gave a nod. And when she returned under that alias, she found the ledger? I believe so. Or a copy. She may not have known her name had been used until she saw it. Then she panicked. I looked down at my notebook anyway. She hid it? Likely. And the soprano found it. I frowned. Wait, you're saying Magdalena wasn't protecting herself? She was protecting someone else? No. Wolfe opened a second folder, thinner, marked in pencil. She was protecting her history. If the forged documents were exposed, her credibility, whatever remained of it, would vanish. There's no public record tying her to the Pavilion fraud, but the Opera House ledger would ruin her. And the soprano? Wolfe leaned back, fanned the pages. She discovered the Pavilion never existed. Perhaps by accident, perhaps through a contractor or a misplaced invoice. She saw Magdalena's name and asked questions. Too many yes. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. So Magdalena may not be the villain. No. Then who? There was a knock. Short. Too firm for Fritz, too polite for Kramer. I crossed the room and opened the door. It was Starnes, Kramer's third-string man, with a hat 2 sizes too small and a folder under one arm. He looked tired. Worse, he looked cooperative. Wolfe, he said, not waiting for an invite. We found the ledger. Wolfe raised one brow. Hidden in the west wall of the costume room. Behind a frame. And? Starnes stepped closer, placed the folder on the edge of Wolfe's desk. Signed, stamped, and counterfeit. Magdalena's name. 3 donor accounts. But here's the thing. Yes, the soprano had signed a transfer request 2 days before she vanished. It was denied. No record why. No follow-up. I cleared my throat. Transfer to where? Cultural Board in Albany. She said she wanted to report inconsistencies. Wolfe's fingers steepled. So the ledger was real. Starnes nodded. And someone blocked her. And you believe, Wolfe said, voice heavy, that this ledger is motive. Starnes hesitated. I think it got her killed. Then you're wrong. Wolfe rose, slowly, deliberately, and crossed to the bookcase. Someone feared exposure, yes, he said, but not murder, not yet. The soprano may still be alive. Starnes looked at me. I looked at Wolfe. His expression held no bluff. She isn't dead, I asked. I did not say that. I said we cannot assume it. He turned. We must trace the paper, the ink, the notary mark. Archie, you will take the ledger to Graf on Lexington. He owes me 3 favours and 2 weekends. I got my coat. Starnes shifted his weight, trying to figure out where that left him. Wolfe looked at him, and for the first time that day, smiled. You may tell Inspector Kramer, he said, that the Pavilion was never built. But the scandal? Oh, Mr. Starnes. That was erected quite beautifully. Graf's shop smelled like varnish and stale cigarettes. He sat hunched under a banker's lamp, peering through a loop like it was judging his worth. This is from the late 30s, no doubt. He tapped the corner of the ledger. Ink's consistent. Notary's mark is real, but smudged. The signature, Magdalena's, is a tracing, not an imitation. Someone used a transfer sheet. Could you prove it in court? I asked. Graf removed the loop. No. But I could say it's not her hand. That helps. It helps. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was elbow deep in a stack of architectural maps. The red chairs were empty, but the yellow one was glowing under the lamplight like always. I handed him the ledger. Graf confirms forgery. Traced signature, smudged notary. Wolfe grunted. I found something. Floor plans from 1937. He unfolded a set of brittle sheets. This wing, here, is listed as Provisional East Pavilion. It was never filed with the city. These drawings don't match the current Opera House layout. No stairwell, no windows, just space. Which doesn't exist. No. I studied the plans. One corner was marked with a hand-drawn symbol, a triangle inside a circle. Not official. What's that? He didn't answer. He was already turning to the next sheet. Fritz. From the hall, the familiar reply, yes, sir, and the soft patter of careful steps. Get Mr. Goodwin a pot of oolong. He'll need it. Fritz, as always, vanished without a creak. I sank into the red chair. Wolfe looked older than usual, not tired, just waited. You think Magdalena drew the plans? No, but she approved them. Or someone forged her approval to siphon money. Either way, she's tied to the fraud. I said, that means she'd want to suppress the ledger, but not kill for it. She didn't. You're sure? Wolfe folded his arms. She lacked proximity. No sightings near the dressing rooms. No evidence she contacted the soprano directly. No trace of her voice in any overheard conversation. So someone else learned what the soprano found? Yes, and silenced her. Wolfe nodded. But not to stop the ledger. To stop the sisterhood. I blinked. She knew they were sisters. Half-sisters. Same father. Different countries. But yes, I believe the soprano discovered it. and that knowledge threatened someone's claim to legacy, power, or money, or all three. Wolfe gestured toward the fire. You see, Archie, scandals layered atop frauds are more volatile than simple greed. And the pavilion was a ghost, the ledger a mirror, and the soprano? She became both witness and threat. Fritz reappeared, placed the tea before me with silent grace. Wolfe didn't drink. Kramer will return, he said, angrier, with subpoenas and headlines. He will blame me for withholding. Will he be wrong? Wolfe didn't reply. The phone rang. I crossed to the desk and picked up. Good voice, strained, feminine, filled the line. I shouldn't be calling, but she wasn't supposed to die. I only wanted her to leave. I swear that. Who is this? Tell Mr. Wolfe. The pavilion was never red. It was always grey. We called it grey. The line went dead. I turned. Wolfe's eyes were already locked on me. Well, I told him. He frowned. Grey Pavilion. I nodded. That name appears nowhere, he muttered. Nowhere in the ledgers, not in blueprints. Could be internal. Pet name among staff. He shook his head. No. It's code. For what? He tapped the side of his chair. The original building had no East Pavilion, but in the 1920s a storage annex was constructed. It was condemned in 33, painted over, sealed, no public access, and never officially named. Precisely. I stood. So they used Red Pavilion to sell the lie, but the real embezzlement happened under Grey Pavilion. Yes. And the soprano discovered it. Yes. And Magdalena feared it because she thought her exile had been used, which it had. I paced. So who knew both sisters? Who worked in the annex? Who had motive to fake the entire pavilion story? Wolfe reached into the bottom drawer of his desk, withdrew Sorrento, the retired tenor. Wolfe opened the file. He was on the original donor list. His wife was secretary to the board. He had access to archives, floor plans, and a reason to keep quiet. And, Wolfe added, a reason to panic. The soprano had been asking about her father. Which was? A board member, wealthy, died in Madrid. I exhaled. So the soprano was about to blow up the fraud, the family, and Magdalena's silence. Yes. And Sorrento? Archie? You must visit him again. I blinked. He nearly brained me with a curtain rod last time. Wolfe didn't smile. This time, go gently. Bring him tea. Ask about the pavilion, and mention the soprano by her real surname. Which is? Valentine. I paused. He'll know it. He'll know it. The room fell quiet again. Just the sound of steam from the kitchen. The ledger on the desk. And Wolfe, still as winter. You think he killed her? Wolfe said. I think he did not mean to. But the truth, the ledger, her name, it was too much. And Magdalena? Still hiding. Still trying to protect the illusion. I picked up my hat. Then it's time to take it down. Wolfe gave one slow nod. And so, into the fog, I went. The office had the smell of rubbed leather, dusted sunlight, and Fritz's lemon oil polish. The winter light crept low across the parquet, casting slender bars on the rug. Wolfe was seated, motionless, chin resting against his high collar, fingers draped together in his lap. He didn't lift his gaze as Inspector Kramer's boots thudded across the floor, heavy with impatience. You dragged half the cast in here, Kramer growled, eyes scanning the assembled cluster in the red guest chairs. This better not be theatre. It is not theatre, Inspector, Wolfe said, evenly, though theatre surrounds us. Magdalena sat stiffly, her gloved hands clenched in her lap. Across from her, the opera's managing director, Mr. Duclos, attempted an air of composed disdain, though his eyes were shiny with sweat. I require silence, Wolfe murmured. The room obeyed. He reached to his left, slowly, and adjusted a sheet of paper upon the desk. The matter of the soprano's death, Wolfe began, has been presumed to pivot upon jealousy, secrets, and identity. That is natural. Melodrama befits opera. But I submit it is not emotion that governs this case. It is finance. Fraud, to be precise. Archie, standing at the wall behind the desk, folded his arms and waited. Wolfe's eyes moved to Magdalena. You, madam, were declared deceased in 1938. That was an error. You have, in fact, lived these 10 years in Manhattan under the name Clara Dawn. A murmur passed between the seated guests. Magdalena looked down, jaw tightening. You were known, Wolfe continued, to have had ties to the architectural renovations planned for the Opera House, particularly the so-called Red Pavilion. The donor records were vague, the designs more so. Because they were never meant to be built, Archie added, his voice dry. The pavilion was fake, Kramer blinked. Fake? Wolfe did not flinch. A false project, a phantom construction, invented to lure benefactors, then funneled into personal coffers. The soprano, Miss Louisa Dawn, discovered the ledgers documenting this fraud. Unfortunately, she did not understand the danger of what she'd found. Duclos leaned forward. "That's absurd," Wolfe asked, his tone still mild. "The plans bear signatures forged from Magdalena's name, made during her exile. Were they to surface, suspicion would fall on her. A convenient scapegoat." Magdalena's voice cracked. "I never agreed to any of it. I was living quietly," Wolfe finished, "and someone wanted to keep it that way." Archie stepped forward, lifting a thin leather portfolio. "Floor plans, 2 sets. One is ink on vellum, authentic. The other, traced in a lighter hand, is signed, same name, different pen." Kramer took the folder with a scowl and leafed through. Wolfe turned his gaze back to the group. "But the core of the matter lies not in identity, it lies in intent. The poisoned glass, Inspector, it was not meant for Miss Dawn." The room hushed. Wolfer's voice dropped. "The glass was swapped, a minor act, done quietly. The target was not the soprano, but another. The soprano reached for the wrong glass. That is why Magdalena ran, not out of guilt, but because she believed the attempt had been meant for her." Magdalena closed her eyes. Duclos made a noise, as if about to speak, but Wolfe silenced it with a glance. "Every detail," he said, "every action taken since, has been an effort to contain something much older than jealousy, a financial deception buried behind velvet curtains and stage lights." Kramer cleared his throat. "You can prove all this?" "I can prove enough," Wolfe replied. "Enough to know who moved the glass." Kramer didn't sit, but he leaned one hand on the corner of the desk. His eyes moved between Wolfe and the room, taking in the rigid spines, the darting glances, the sheen of nerves gathering behind polite expressions. "Let's hear it," he said. "Who was the intended mark?" Wolfe didn't speak. Not yet. He lifted a small envelope from the corner of the desk. Inside was a photograph, slightly bent at the corner, of the reception table from the opening night of La Favorita. A silver tray, 2 crystal glasses. The angle was poor, but one could just make out the hands that reached for them. He handed it to Kramer. "Miss Dawn," Wolfe said, gesturing toward the opera star seated by the window, had just performed. She exited stage left, crossed the corridor, and entered the reception antechamber. There, 2 glasses of cordial had been laid out. One for her, one for Duclos. Duclos' brow furrowed. "You were delayed," Wolfe cut in, "by a reporter from the Herald. She cornered you by the stage curtain. Your voice raised slightly, enough for it to be overheard." Kramer narrowed his eyes. "By who?" "Mr. Gerard," Archie answered, "a retired tenor. Now renting a loft on East 9th. He heard the exchange, saw the tray, and watched someone else, someone not authorized, enter the chamber alone." Magdalena opened her mouth, then closed it. Her posture wilted slightly. Wolfe adjusted his sleeve. The poison was administered in haste. The glass meant for Duclos was tainted. But fate, or stage nerves, intervened. Miss Dawn took it instead. "I didn't know," Magdalena said, her voice barely audible. "I swear it." "No," Wolfe said gently. "You didn't. But someone did. Someone who feared what might be said that night. Perhaps Duclos was to mention the pavilion. Perhaps he would name names. That uncertainty was intolerable." Kramer turned on Duclos. "You denying all this?" Duclos had gone quite still. I didn't poison anyone. I didn't move a glass. I don't know what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting," Wolfe said. "I'm describing. The ledger, as you can see, records withdrawals tied to non-existent construction. The signatures? Forged. The person who would suffer most if exposed? You." "I wasn't alone in this," Duclos snapped. "You think I ran the whole thing myself?" "No," Wolfe agreed. "You had help. But that is a matter for the inspector to untangle. My obligation was to the truth, and to the woman who died without knowing she was not the intended victim." The silence that followed was taut. Archie walked across the room, laid the photograph beside the ledger, and gave Kramer a single nod. "You'll want to talk to Gerard yourself," he said. "He's not subtle, but he's observant." Magdalena stood, her voice quivered. "I never wanted this. I only wanted to sing again, quietly." Wolfe did not rise. "Then you should not have signed your exile in velvet. It left ink." She turned toward the door, but Fritz was already there, summoned silently by Wolfe's bell 15 minutes before. He stood as a barrier, polite but immovable. Kramer signalled him aside. "She's coming with me. So's Duclos." Fritz stepped back. The guests filed out. Wolfe finally exhaled, a low breath beneath the stained glass dome overhead. Archie waited until the door clicked shut. Then, "You knew all along, didn't you?" Wolfe allowed a faint smile. No, Archie, I knew nothing. I deduced which is better. The office was warm with the scent of mahogany and Fritz's morning polish. Wolfe had summoned them all, the conductor, the costumer, the manager, Magdalena and Kramer, who leaned stiffly against the red chair nearest the door. Archie stood just behind Wolfe's shoulder, notepad angled, eyebrows in motion. Wolfe's hands rested on the chair's arms. His gaze moved to the man in the dove-grey suit seated opposite. Elias Marin, conductor of the Metropolitan Opera, sat with his fingers clenched, a polished baton peeking from his coat's inner pocket, like a relic of dignity. Wolfe's voice broke the hush. "Mr. Marin, you adjusted the soprano's costume before the final aria. Why?" Marin shifted. "A clasp had loosened. I thought it might fall." Wolfe inclined his head, the flick of his eyes a command. "That's odd. She had a dedicated dresser, yet you, a conductor, stepped in." Marin glanced at the manager. She was panicked. Time was short. "I offered help." "Convenient," Wolfe said flatly. "You also had keys to the backstage corridor, to the costume storage, and to the green room bar." "I am the musical director," Marin said, forcing composure. "Access comes with duty." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. "And with opportunity." Kramer stirred. "You have something more, Wolfe." Wolfe nodded. The soprano drank from a crystal tumbler after her performance. There were 2 glasses. Magdalena's was untouched. The poisoned one was set beside her dressing mirror. Wolfe let the pause stretch. She never touched it. Magdalena, in her high-collared coat, drew in a breath but said nothing. Wolfe went on. The poisoned glass had traces of a fingerprint, partial index finger, right hand. The smudge did not belong to the soprano. Or to Magdalena. Marin blinked once. Archie moved from the shadows. "The print matches the one on your master key, maestro." The baton in Marin's coat shifted slightly as he drew in breath. Wolfe didn't blink. "You meant to silence Magdalena," Wolfe said. "She had seen the ledger. The forged architectural plans, drawn during her exile, bore her name. That ledger would expose the fictitious Red Pavilion." "You feared she would speak." Marin's mouth moved, but no sound emerged. "Instead," Wolfe said, "the soprano died. And she took the glass meant for her sister." Marin's face crumpled, the mask of refinement peeling in real time. A shallow breath escaped him, then another, longer, like a baton drawn across a dying phrase. "She was never meant to drink it," he said, barely above a whisper. No one spoke. The silence was absolute. Marin turned slightly, not toward Wolfe or Archie, but toward Magdalena. His voice carried the weight of ash. "She came back to ruin everything," he muttered. "She didn't understand what we'd built, what I was trying to preserve." Magdalena remained motionless. Her gloves were folded tightly in her lap, as though they were the only things keeping her rooted to the chair. Kramer stepped forward. His hand hovered near his coat. "You were bleeding the opera dry," Wolfe said. "And when your forgeries were at risk, you resorted to murder." "No," Marin barked, then swallowed the sound. "No, I didn't mean to kill anyone. I only..." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "You only what?" "I thought she would stay out of it," Marin said, looking at the floor. Magdalena always stayed in the shadows. But then she returned, and she found the ledger. He looked up, his eyes suddenly full. It was only meant to frighten her, a warning. The glass was meant to make her ill, not kill. "I never thought..." "You never thought," voice dry as salt. "That's your line?" He reached forward and lifted the baton from Marin's coat pocket, placing it carefully on Wolfe's desk like a broken sword. "You adjusted the soprano's costume," Archie said. "You moved the poisoned glass into place." But Magdalena hesitated. The soprano reached for the wrong drink. "She was just trying to help," Marin said. His voice broke on the last word. Kramer nodded once. "That's enough." He gestured to the plainclothes officer by the door. Marin stood slowly. His hands shook, not dramatically, but like a string quartet falling slightly out of tune. As the door closed behind them, Wolfe leaned back in the yellow chair. The air had not cleared. If anything, it had grown heavier, thick with velvet and loss. Archie turned to Wolfe. "Poison meant for one sister, taken by the other." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Justice, Mr. Goodwin, is rarely poetic, but sometimes it rehearses well." The brownstone was quiet again, the kind of quiet that lingered long after a storm had passed. I was in the front room, coat slung over the armrest, when Wolfe declined the check. It was folded neatly in an envelope, resting on the corner of his desk. "I will not accept compensation for ineffable chaos," Wolfe said, not looking up. The client, seated in one of the red chairs, fumbled for a reply. He didn't find one. After a stammered nod, He rose, gathered his things, and left without shaking hands. Fritz, silent as a church bell mouse, escorted him to the door. Wolfe finally looked at me. "The theatre," he muttered, "is indulgence disguised as sophistication." "Oprah, you're not joining the fan club?" I asked, leaning back. He sighed. "Florid. Undisciplined. An area is not a confession. Its embroidery stitched to noise." The aftermath of a case always left Wolfe in need of opinion, preferably his. Dinner followed. Trout à la Genevoise. Fritz outdid himself. Thin lemon glaze, a whisper of white wine, toasted almond slices. Wolfe, as expected, finished all but the parsley. "You're quiet," I said, setting my fork aside. He dabbed his lips. "There is nothing in this matter that merits further rumination." "Not even Magdalena?" Wolfe's brow twitched. "She was an instrument," he replied, "played in someone else's symphony." I didn't press him. I was thinking of her too, the way she turned at the courthouse steps, glanced once behind her, then vanished into a cab. Manhattan was damp that night. A low fog pooled near the sidewalks, and even the avenue lamplight seemed tired. Wolfe excused himself at precisely 9. Orchid time. I followed upstairs, the floorboards creaking with familiar protest. He adjusted the blinds in the plant room. I stood back, watching him move between the benches, inspecting roots, brushing dust from glass panes. He was silent for some time. The air smelled of damp bark and warm fertilizer. "She will not be found," he said at last. "Magdalena? She's gone?" I nodded. "I wonder if the opera will go on." He didn't answer. He was peering at a bulb that refused to open. Wolfe rotated the small clay pot a quarter turn, examining the stubborn orchid from a new angle. Its leaves were rich, but the bud remained clenched, a tight green fist against the bloom it owed the world. "She came for the ledger, but stayed to protect her name." "No," Wolfe replied, still not looking at me. "She stayed because the lie was beautiful. Some find comfort in ruins." He brushed a pale leaf gently with his thumb, as if scolding it for its reluctance. Below us, the radiators hissed and sighed like old men remembering battles. I leaned against the frame of the doorway, my hands in my pockets. We weren't likely to speak more tonight, but I wasn't ready for sleep just yet. "Why the trout tonight?" I asked. Wolfe didn't respond immediately. He was back to pruning. A dried stem snapped between his fingers with the softest crack. "Pleases Fritz to make dishes that require patience," he said. "He, too, must recover." "From murder?" "From noise." The room glowed softly under the greenhouse lamps. Somewhere outside a siren wailed faintly, not urgent, not near. I thought about Magdalena. The way she spoke, that controlled defiance. The voice of a woman always on the verge of fleeing, and always ready to fight before she did. "She didn't even leave a note," I said. Wolfe grunted. "A note," he said, "would imply regret. She had none. Do you?" His shoulders stiffened, just enough to catch it. "No." Fritz appeared quietly in the hall behind me, cloth over his arm. He glanced once at Wolfe, then at me, and said nothing. He knew better than to interrupt a night still unwinding. Wolfe turned off one lamp, then another. As the light receded, the orchids grew shadowed, just silhouettes in warm mist. He moved slowly through them, back straight, hand steady. "Archie," he said. "Yes." "Some stories stay closed." I looked at him. He didn't meet my gaze. "Like the Velvet Opera House?" He nodded once, then stepped past me into the corridor, his slippers soft against the floor. I waited a moment before following. Behind us, the orchids waited too, blooming or not, indifferent to endings.